They always said our house looked perfect from the outside. That yellow two-story at the end of Alderwood Lane, with the trimmed hedges and matching shutters. You know the kind, where the American flag doesn't have a wrinkle and the porch light turns on at exactly the same time every night. People used to compliment my mother at school pickups, saying things like, "Your home is so welcoming, Diane," and "Your girls must be so lucky." I never had the heart to correct them. The truth is, the house never really felt like mine. Not even when I was the only child. I grew up learning how to move quietly through hallways, how to read moods before I opened my mouth. My parents weren't cruel, but they were calculated. My dad, Charles, was the kind of man who measured affection in practicality. Did you have food? A roof? Then you were fine. My mom, Diane, cared deeply about appearances. Emotions were for private moments, and even then, only if they were convenient. I was there first. And I was alone for 5 years. I remember thinking I was doing everything right. Good grades. Clean room. Quiet. Obedient. I learned early that making a scene got you nowhere. That praise came only when it made them look good. Ava got Student of the Month, my mom would tell her friends, but she'd say it with the same tone she used to mention a sale at Macy's. Like a transaction. Something mildly impressive, but not worth lingering on. Still, I tried. I tried so fucking hard to make them proud. I played piano for 4 years even though I hated it. I joined Girl Scouts even though I didn't fit in. I smiled in every damn photo, wore the dresses they picked for me, and said thank you when they handed me books I never asked for on Christmas morning. I told myself that's just what families were like. Distant. Formal. Focused on the next achievement. But even then, even in those early years, I remember feeling this low, constant thrum of something I couldn't name, like a string pulled too tight under my skin. I think I knew, somewhere deep down, that I wasn't being raised. I was being managed. Still, those years before my sister was born, they were quiet. Cold, but bearable. I had the house to myself. I had silence. I had my books, my sketch pad, my own little rituals. If I was invisible, at least I wasn't in the way. But everything changed the day she arrived. I remember the day my sister was born clearer than any birthday I've ever had. I was 5. Old enough to understand the concept of a sibling, but too young to realize I was being replaced. They brought her home wrapped in a floral blanket with a bow on her head so big it looked like a costume. Jessica. That was her name. Even then, it sounded like a spotlight. Everyone who came to visit used the word perfect. Perfect little nose. Perfect little lips. Perfect baby. They said it so often that I started counting it like a game. I lost track somewhere after 27. I stood off to the side while my grandparents cooed over her, clutching the coloring book I'd brought into the living room to show them. No one looked. No one asked. They handed me a doll a few days later. "So you can have your own baby too," my mom said with a tight smile, but it felt like a bribe. Even then, I understood the difference between attention and obligation. Things shifted fast. Jessica cried, and my mother ran. I cried, and I was told to be quiet. She got new toys just because. I got mine on birthdays, small, sensible things that came with gift receipts. When I spilled milk, I was scolded. When Jessica shattered a vase, it was an accident. I was 5 years old, trying to understand a world where the rules were different depending on who you were. They never said they loved her more. Not in words. But they didn't need to. Love doesn't always come in declarations, it comes in patterns. And the pattern was clear. Jessica wasn't just the baby. She was the centerpiece. I became the backdrop. By the time she could walk, they were calling her their little star. She was loud, needy, dramatic, everything I wasn't allowed to be. They thought it was adorable. Such personality. My dad would beam while she shrieked in the middle of a restaurant. I remember once, at a family gathering, I told a story about something I'd learned at school. Halfway through my sentence, Jessica sneezed, and everyone turned to her. No one asked me to finish. It happened all the time after that. I started speaking less. At school, I was quiet, reliable, forgettable. The kind of student teachers liked but rarely remembered. At home, I faded into my room more and more. I spent hours alone, sketching the world as I saw it, jagged lines, crooked smiles, hollow eyes. It was the only place I could put everything I didn't have words for. Drawing kept me sane. It kept me safe. Our house was a museum of Jessica. Her photos. Her trophies. Her framed finger paintings. My art was kept in a box in the attic. And when I asked why, my mother would say, "Don't be silly, Ava. Of course we're proud of you. Now be a good girl and let your sister practice her dance." I stopped asking after that. I wasn't bitter. Not yet. At that point, I still believed maybe they just didn't notice. Maybe if I tried harder, got better grades, won more awards, they'd see me again. But there's only so long you can scream in silence before something inside you starts to go quiet for good. I didn't hate Jessica. Not then. I was too busy trying to understand how a house could hold 4 people and still feel like no one saw me standing in it. But I was learning something important, even back then. Something that would take years to fully take shape. Being forgotten doesn't make you powerless. It makes you dangerous. Because no one watches the girl they've already erased. When I turned 11, I started lying to myself. I told myself things would get better when Jessica grew up a little. That maybe once she was old enough to stop throwing tantrums and clinging to my mother's side like a purse dog, my parents would remember I existed too. That maybe, just maybe, the imbalance in our family wasn't intentional. Maybe it was just temporary. It wasn't. But at 11, you don't understand the permanence of some things. You think everything's still moldable. That love, if you just hold still long enough, will come back around. I clung to that lie like a life raft. For a few years, things settled into a kind of numb routine. I had school. I had my sketchbooks. I started taking on small commissions online, designing logos or drawing portraits for strangers who somehow appreciated my work more than my own family ever had. It felt good. Secret. Mine. I even began saving. Not for clothes or junk. For escape. I didn't call it that at the time, but that's what it was. I'd stash the money in an envelope between the pages of a hardcover art book on my shelf, the one no one ever touched. The bills were wrinkled and soft from my fingers, but they felt like a future I was building $1 at a time. Back at home, the contrast between us only deepened. Jessica was 7 by then and fully aware that she was the star of the household. She'd parade into rooms like she was on a stage, performing her own little dramas, crying if she didn't get her way, pouting until someone handed her something. And they always did. I used to watch her, fascinated, not because I envied her, but because I couldn't understand how someone could expect so much and feel entitled to it all. She was never told no. Not once. When she broke the TV remote by hurling it across the room, my mom said she was just passionate. When she got caught cheating on a spelling quiz, my dad smoothed it over with the principal and brought her home ice cream. When she shoved a classmate and got suspended for a day, she cried, and suddenly she had a puppy. I got a lecture when I forgot to unload the dishwasher. I still remember the afternoon I won an art competition. First place, statewide. My teacher had pulled me aside with actual tears in her eyes, saying how rare it was for someone my age to win. She called my parents herself. They didn't come to the award ceremony. I gave the acceptance speech in a too-big blazer from the clearance rack and looked out at the crowd, pretending the empty seats reserved for family weren't mine. Later that week, my mom posted a picture of Jessica in a Halloween costume on Facebook with the caption, "So proud of our shining star." It got 200 likes. My award hung on the back of my bedroom door. That was the first time something inside me broke in a way that didn't grow back right. I didn't confront them. I didn't cry. I just moved quieter through the house. Ate dinner faster. Stopped volunteering details about my life. It was like realizing you're in a room full of people who speak a language you'll never understand. So you stop trying to translate. You just go mute. Still, for a while, I kept hoping something would shift. Maybe when Jessica hit double digits. Maybe when I started high school. Maybe some milestone would wake them up and they'd finally see how uneven things had become. I didn't understand then that for some people, favoritism isn't a flaw. It's a choice. And they'd already made theirs. Looking back, I think I stayed too long in that house not because I loved them, but because I still thought I had something left to prove. But the truth was, I didn't. Not to them. What I had left to prove would come later. And they were going to feel every second of it. When Jessica turned 11, the change wasn't slow. It was sharp. Surgical. Like someone had walked into the house with a blade and carved me out of the picture. There was no warning. No explanation. Just one morning where I sat down for breakfast and realized the only voice being listened to at the table wasn't mine. My parents had always favored her, yes, but that year, it crossed a line. I don't think they even noticed it happen. I think they just let go of me, like a balloon they assumed had floated away on its own. It was subtle in the beginning. They stopped asking when my exams were. They stopped checking in about school, friends, art. Conversations started with Jessica and ended with Jessica, and I was just background noise, if I was acknowledged at all. I could have been a guest in my own home. Hell, I could have been the maid. I remember one night, I cooked dinner because my mom had a migraine and Jessica wanted spaghetti, but when I served it, my father asked her if she had made it. She giggled and said, "No, obviously," and they all laughed. I sat across from them, the pasta cooling on my plate, wondering how a human being could be so visible and yet so unseen. They decorated the house with her achievements like it was a shrine, trophies for participation, not excellence, ribbons from activities she barely showed up to, glossy photos from her cheer competitions that always ended in the same fake smile and overdone makeup. When I was her age, my awards lived in a shoebox under my bed. I had earned every one of them: academic decathlons, national art contests, science fairs, and no one had ever even thought to frame a certificate. Now the hallway looked like a museum dedicated to Jessica Conway's mediocrity. The age gap between us was 5 years. It might as well have been 50. She was loud, shallow, needy, and so impossibly entitled that it baffled me how she functioned outside the house. But that's the thing, I don't think she ever really had to. Every problem that reached her path was swept aside before it even touched her. My parents protected her from consequences like she was porcelain. In truth, she was just spoiled. Every tantrum rewarded. Every mistake rationalized. Every inconvenience absorbed by someone else, usually me. And at some point, I stopped fighting it. I stopped speaking up. Because what's the point of screaming when no one even bothers to look up? They started forgetting me in ways that went deeper than missing a conversation. They forgot my schedule. Forgot my favorite foods. They forgot my birthday dinner 2 years in a row. They forgot I existed beyond function. I wasn't their daughter anymore. I was just the person who closed the dishwasher, paid for my own clothes, and somehow made myself smaller in every room so Jessica could keep center stage. It was like being slowly erased, but still conscious through every second of it. One night, Jessica had a nightmare and crawled into their bed sobbing like she was 5 again. She was 11. I know because I was 16 and standing in the hallway, staring at the open door to their room, watching my mother cradle her like a broken thing that needed to be protected from the world. I can still hear the way she whispered, "It's okay, baby, we're here," like Jessica had just survived something traumatic instead of waking up from a dream about a pop quiz. I turned and walked back to my room in the dark. No one had held me like that since I was 3. And if I'd tried to ask for it, they would have said I was being too dramatic. The next morning, they forgot to tell me that Jessica's school was closed for a teacher workday. I found out when I came downstairs ready for my shift at the bookstore and saw her in pajamas, sprawled across the living room, watching reality TV and eating cereal from the box. My mother looked up from her laptop and asked if I could drop her off at the mall after work. I nodded, because that's what I did back then. I nodded. I agreed. I made space. I didn't even realize how angry I was becoming. It was quiet, like a gas leak. Slow, invisible, and absolutely lethal. That was the year I stopped trying to be a daughter. Not out of spite, but because the role had already been recast. I was the ghost in that house, and ghosts don't ask for love. They just watch. And I was watching everything. Every dollar spent on her. Every moment of indulgence. Every time my name was spoken like an afterthought, if at all. I was done hoping. And in that space where hope used to live, something colder began to take shape. By the time I turned 17, I had stopped speaking unless I absolutely had to. Words, I realized, were currency in that house, too expensive to waste on people who didn't listen. My parents had become experts at pretending I was fine. As long as I kept my grades up, paid for my own things, didn't cause a scene, I was exactly the kind of daughter they wanted. Silent, self-sufficient, invisible. And I played along. I played it so well that I think they truly believed I was content being forgotten. But I wasn't. I was studying them. Every day, every habit. Like an architect memorizing the flaws in a building she planned to demolish. I remember the way my mother's face would light up when Jessica walked into the room, every feature softening, every ounce of warmth summoned to the surface like she was some rare, precious light. When I walked in, nothing, not even annoyance. Just disinterest. The absence of expression. The kind of blank look you give a stranger you pass in the grocery store. It hurt less, in a way, than rage might have. At least rage would have meant they felt something. I had been living off scraps of affection for so long that I started to forget what it felt like to be wanted. Not just acknowledged. Wanted. And every time I caught myself hoping they'd remember me, I felt sick. So I stopped hoping. I replaced it with something else. Something useful. Control. While they showered Jessica with designer clothes and expensive tech, I poured myself into work. My savings account grew slowly, but steadily. I got a remote graphic design job and took on freelance projects late into the night, my room lit by the cool blue of my laptop and the glow of a desk lamp I bought secondhand. I tracked every dollar. I logged every hour. I wasn't just working, I was building. A future. A fallback. A failsafe. That's what they never saw. My parents thought I was just quiet. Withdrawn. But I wasn't shrinking, I was calculating. I was removing myself from their reach, inch by inch, until the day would come when I didn't have to answer to them at all. And in the meantime, I kept watching. Jessica was thriving, at least by their standards. She wore a new face every week. This one for school, bubbly and bright. That one for boys, wide-eyed and soft-spoken. And the one she saved for our parents? Polished and perfect, all good grades and gratitude until she didn't get her way. Then the mask dropped, the tantrum rolled out, and like clockwork, they caved. Every single time. She got what she wanted without ever having to earn it. And when she stumbled, which was often, they acted like the world had wronged her. She failed a math test and they blamed the teacher. She skipped gym and they wrote her a doctor's note. She missed curfew and they blamed the streetlights. When I got a 98 instead of a 100, my father asked what I did wrong. I think the worst part wasn't that Jessica was spoiled. It was that she knew it. She soaked in their attention like a queen on her throne, watching the world bend around her. And me? I was just the help. I was the person she called when she forgot her homework, or wanted a ride, or needed to borrow money that never found its way back to me. She didn't fear me. She didn't even respect me. To her, I was harmless. Passive. Background. And I let her think that. Because it's easier to build something when no one's looking. It's easier to take notes when everyone else assumes you're too quiet to matter. It's easier to plan when the people closest to you underestimate your capacity to burn them down. My room was covered in sketches by then, blueprints, really. Diagrams of spaces I wanted to design someday. But the truth is, my real project wasn't on paper. It was in motion. I was laying groundwork beneath everything, beneath my silence, beneath their neglect. I was learning how to move beneath their radar, how to gather what I needed, how to protect the parts of myself they couldn't reach. They didn't know it, but every time they looked through me, every time they praised Jessica for breathing and ignored me for building, they were giving me exactly what I needed. Distance. And with distance came clarity. They thought they'd broken me. They didn't know they were giving me time. I don't remember the day it happened because of any specific detail. I remember it because of the feeling. That quiet, stomach-sickening jolt when you realize something irreversible has been done to you, and the people who did it are smiling like it's nothing. I remember the sun coming through the kitchen windows. I remember the sound of Jessica's laugh echoing through the hallway. I remember my hands going cold, even though it was summer outside. But mostly, I remember the betrayal settling in my bones like rot. It started with a routine visit. I was back from college for a few days, tired, burned out, but still hanging on to the stupid, stubborn idea that maybe if I showed up enough, they'd care. I walked through the front door like I always did, dropped my bag at the foot of the stairs, and smelled something new, leather and polish and money. Jessica was outside in the driveway, circling a brand new car like it was a prize on a game show. Deep navy, sleek curves, custom plates with her name on them. It wasn't just a car. It was a statement. A monument to how far I had fallen in their eyes. I should have walked away. I should have kept going. But something in me cracked that day. Something old and small and naive, whatever part of me still wanted to be loved by them, stood up inside me one last time. So I went into the kitchen. The paperwork was sitting on the counter like it was meant to be seen. I didn't realize what I was looking at first, just a glance, a skim, and then everything sharpened. A bank withdrawal. $50,000. My name. My fucking name. Right there, printed clearly across the top. Not as the recipient. As the source. I read the document twice. 3 times. I checked the dates. The signature. The routing numbers. There was no mistake. They had pulled the money from my savings account. The one I'd been building since I was 16. Freelance job by freelance job. Overtime hours. Cancelled nights out. All of it stacked and protected like bricks in a wall that would one day buy me my first house. My escape plan. And they'd used it to buy Jessica a car. They didn't even ask. I stood there for what felt like hours, the sound of her voice outside rising and falling like waves. Laughing, posing for pictures, revving the engine. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stood there with that paper in my hand, the edges curling beneath my fingers, the floor feeling like it might disappear beneath me. Because I knew, without a single doubt, that they hadn't made a mistake. This wasn't some accident. They'd decided to do this. My parents had taken the thing I worked hardest for and handed it with a bow to someone who had never earned anything in her life. Eventually, my mother wandered in, phone in hand, smiling like we were at a party. She saw me with the paper and didn't flinch. Just said, "Oh, you saw it. That's all." No apology. No guilt. No shame. Like I'd found a receipt for milk. She called it an investment in the family. Said Jessica needed something to get to her new internship. Said it would have been selfish to let her go without, not when we had the resources. We. As if the money was theirs to take. As if I was just a faucet they could turn on and off when it suited them. I didn't respond. I folded the paper in half. Slid it into my bag. Nodded once. I don't think she even noticed the look on my face. Why would she? She hadn't really looked at me in years. I left that afternoon and didn't come back. For weeks, I said nothing. No texts. No calls. I didn't block them, I wanted them to wonder. I wanted them to feel the absence of me, like a door slamming shut in a room they didn't realize they needed access to until it was gone. Inside, I was unraveling. But not in the way they'd expect. Not with tears or tantrums. No. What unraveled was the last thread of loyalty I had ever felt toward them. The last part of me that had still tried to understand. I wasn't confused anymore. I wasn't heartbroken. I was awake. I started moving differently after that. I opened new accounts. Moved what money I had left. Changed passwords. Scanned every legal document I could get my hands on. I filed reports. Set traps. Dug into everything they'd done with my information over the years. And as I peeled back those layers, I found more. So much more. Hidden things. Quiet thefts. Bits of paperwork that had my name on them, my numbers, my credit. They hadn't just stolen from me once. They'd made it a habit. And while they celebrated Jessica's 18th birthday with streamers and cake and matching outfits, I sat in my apartment and started planning how I was going to burn it all down. Not with fire. With precision. After they stole that money, something in me died. But something else was born in its place, something colder, smarter, more deliberate. I stopped playing the long game of earning their respect. I stopped grieving what I'd never had. And for the first time in my life, I let myself feel everything without guilt. The resentment, the betrayal, the bitter disgust. No more rationalizing. No more telling myself they tried their best. They hadn't tried at all. They'd taken. And I'd let them. But that was over now. I didn't go no contact. Not yet. That would have tipped them off. Instead, I answered texts with clipped, neutral responses. I gave them silence wrapped in politeness. I let them think I was busy with work, that I was doing great, just tired, while behind the scenes, I was laying track like a runaway train about to loop back through their quiet little lives and derail everything. The first thing I did was move my money, what was left of it. I'd already lost $50,000, but I wasn't about to let them touch another cent. I opened new bank accounts at an entirely different institution, set up two-factor authentication on everything, and froze every line of credit they might have had access to. Then I started locking down passwords, emails, backup accounts. I left no door open. Not even a crack. Then came the second part, watching. I became obsessed with their digital footprint. Jessica's social media was a goldmine. She posted everything, new outfits, new gadgets, new locations tagged with exact times. Her birthday trip. Her, I'm an adult now, photo shoot next to the car they bought with my future. I saved it all. Screenshots. Dates. Receipts. Documentation. I dug deeper. My parents were as sloppy as she was. Shared family plan logins. Laptops they never logged out of. Email chains with financial institutions where they casually tossed around my name and social security number like it was family trivia. I spent nights combing through their online histories, piecing together the full extent of how they'd used me, credit cards I never signed for, accounts opened in my name, just in case, and a few payments made on my behalf that turned out to be charges for Jessica's shopping sprees. It wasn't just the car. It was everything. I built a file. I didn't know what I was going to do with it yet. Legal, financial, reputational, I hadn't decided. But I was going to do something. I wanted it to be clean. Surgical. I didn't want drama. I wanted consequences. They thought I was gone, drifting. They thought I'd taken the hit and moved on. What I had actually done was relocate myself from the battlefield so I could build a sniper nest on the ridge. And all the while, I smiled when they texted. I replied when they called. I let them keep thinking I was their good girl. Their quiet daughter. The one who never caused trouble. The one who forgave everything. I gave them the same mask I'd worn my entire life. Meanwhile, I was clearing out. Emotionally, financially, physically. I spent weeks preparing for the move. I'd been living in a shared apartment with two roommates I could barely stand, scraping by in a neighborhood that never felt like mine. Now I was ready to leave. I found a new place, downtown, clean, spacious, secure. 2 bedrooms. Hardwood floors. A lease with only my name on it. It was expensive, but I didn't care. I had enough to cover it, and I had plans for how to get the rest. Plans that would take back everything they'd taken from me, plus interest. Before I left the old apartment, I sent one last message in the family group chat, moving into a new place. Closer to work. Will send address when I'm settled. No one replied for 2 days. When they did, it was a single thumbs up from my mother. Of course. On the morning of the move, I rented a truck. I packed in silence. I didn't ask for help. I didn't offer a forwarding address. I just took my things and drove away from the life they'd backed me into. But before I signed the lease, before I turned the key in the lock, before I unloaded even one box, I made a short detour. Back to their house. Back to Jessica's car. It was parked in the driveway like it belonged there. Like it hadn't been stolen from me, dollar by dollar, year by year. The keys, I knew, were still where Jessica kept them, in the flower-painted dish on the entryway table, just inside the door. They still hadn't changed the alarm code. It was still my birthday. I let myself in, took the keys, and walked out. Just like that. Then I drove to their bank. And withdrew $100,000. Not from their checking account. That would have been too obvious. I took it from the trust. The one they'd quietly built using my name, my credentials, my credit, my legitimacy, but redirected for Jessica's future. Her business. her brand, her life. I emptied it. They didn't even know it existed under my authority until it was already gone. By the time they realized what happened, I was gone too. New apartment, new locks, new life. And for the first time in years, I could breathe. It didn't take long. 3 days, maybe 4, before the first text came in. Then the calls. The emails. The frantic voicemails with just enough fake worry layered over very real panic. I listened to them all once, just for the satisfaction. The rising urgency in their voices. The shift from, just checking in, sweetheart, to, we're very concerned about you, to, you need to call us back immediately. They weren't concerned about me. Not really. They were concerned about the car. And the money. Jessica called me first. Her voice was shrill, her breathing erratic, like someone had stolen her identity. She didn't even try to hide it. She went straight to screaming, "What the hell did you do? Where is it? Where's my car? My fucking car is gone." And I just stared at my phone screen, listening without saying a word. She kept going for a full minute before I hung up. No response. No reaction. Just quiet. Then came Diane. My mother. Her voicemail was calmer, too calm. That tight, passive-aggressive calm she used to use when I was a kid, and she was trying not to make a scene. She said they were worried about me. That they just wanted to make sure I was okay. That Jessica was devastated. And I couldn't help but laugh. Devastated? Because the car she bought with my stolen future was no longer parked in her driveway? Good. Charles was next. My father. He didn't leave a message. Just called. Over and over. 16 missed calls in one day. Like persistence would make a difference. Like repeating the same number would somehow drag me back into the role they'd written for me. The obedient daughter. The forgiving daughter. The quiet one. But I wasn't her anymore. I didn't owe them anything. Not a conversation. Not an explanation. Not even closure. I let their calls ring out. I watched their names flash across my screen with the kind of detached curiosity I usually reserved for spam numbers. I wasn't angry anymore. That was the surprising part. The rage that had burned so hot for so long had cooled into something steadier. More satisfying. Indifference. I didn't think about how they were coping. I didn't care whether Jessica had to take the bus or borrow a friend's car or walk in the rain. I didn't wonder if my parents had checked their bank accounts again and realized what else was missing. I didn't care what lies they told themselves to feel better. They had built an entire life around the idea that I would always stay in the background. That I would always swallow my pride, stay quiet, and let Jessica shine. And then one day I didn't. That's what killed them. Not the money. Not the car. The loss of control. The realization that the daughter they ignored for 2 decades had finally turned around and locked the door behind her. That they couldn't reach me because I didn't want to be reached. That their guilt couldn't manipulate me. That their panic couldn't pull me back. They weren't grieving me. They were grieving the access they lost. So I let them sit with that. I let them wonder. I moved into my new place and never looked back. It was everything the old house wasn't: quiet, clean, entirely mine. I set up my office by the window and watched the sun move across the hardwood floors while I drank coffee without anyone barging in, demanding, whining, taking. I hung my art on the walls. I burned candles that smelled like pine and smoke. I bought a bookshelf and filled it with all the things I'd had to put away over the years: books, sketch pads, pieces of myself that had been too loud for them. There was no celebration. No victory dance. Just silence. The kind of silence that doesn't ache. The kind that feels like breathing after being underwater too long. And while they stewed in their confusion, their faux concern, their helpless little messages typed through clenched teeth, I went on living. They could keep their drama. I had my freedom. And for once, it was loud enough. It was a Thursday afternoon when the doorbell rang. I didn't answer it. I was sitting in my living room, cross-legged on the rug, surrounded by unpacked boxes. The good kind of mess, the kind you make when you're building something new. The sun was pouring in through the south-facing windows, touching every corner of the space I now called mine. No one else had a key. No one else had a say. A minute later, my phone lit up. Another call from Diane. I watched it flash, then fade. They had reached the desperation stage. The "we're worried" calls were now daily. They came in pairs, sometimes a trio, Jessica, then Mom, then Dad, like a coordinated PR campaign, all acting like they just wanted to hear my voice. But I knew what they wanted. They didn't say the car was missing. They didn't mention the money. But I could hear the strain beneath the words. Every "sweetheart" sounded like a script. Every "we love you" carried the same anxious edge a gambler has when the stakes are too high. They thought if they used the right tone, if they said the things they hadn't said in years, they could guilt me into resurfacing, into giving back what they'd taken first. I let them sit in the silence. Then they tried something new. A group call. I didn't answer that either. But they left a voicemail. Diane's voice led the charge, soft and careful. She said they were all together, of course they were, and that they missed me. That they were so worried because I hadn't responded in days. That they just wanted to make sure I was okay. Then Charles chimed in, voice firmer, colder. He said I was acting out of character, that this wasn't the daughter they raised. That they didn't know what had gotten into me lately. That I needed to remember family comes first. Finally, Jessica. Her voice was flat, annoyed more than anything. She said she hoped I was happy and that Mom hasn't stopped crying. As if that was supposed to mean something to me now. As if tears could cancel out a lifetime of being overlooked, undervalued, and outright stolen from. They ended the message by saying they loved me. 3 words they hadn't said in years. 3 words I once would have given anything to hear. Now? They meant nothing. You don't get to ignore a person their entire life and then call it love when they finally decide to walk away. You don't get to demand affection when all you've ever given is conditions. You don't get to mourn a connection you never bothered to maintain. So I didn't answer. I didn't text. I didn't unblock their numbers. I just sat in my living room, barefoot on the hardwood floor, drinking coffee from my chipped mug and watching the world outside keep turning. Birds flitted across the rooftop across the street. Somewhere in the apartment above, someone was playing jazz. And I breathed. No more pretending. No more begging for scraps. No more shrinking myself to make room for Jessica's shine. They were right about one thing. I wasn't acting like the daughter they raised. Because that girl was gone. The one who used to chase their approval. The one who cried quietly behind closed doors every time they forgot her birthday. The one who sat at the dinner table while they fawned over Jessica's latest nothing and said, "It's okay. I'm just glad she's happy." She was dead. And in her place stood someone who owed them absolutely nothing. So I let the message sit. I let their worry rot. I let their confusion echo back to them without a single sound from me. They wanted me to come running. Instead, I disappeared. They had never truly noticed my presence. Not the way it mattered. To them, I was convenient when I was useful, invisible when I wasn't. The background noise to Jessica's spotlight. But when I vanished, when I took the car, the money, and their access, they noticed the absence like a missing limb. That was the first time in my life I became important to them. Not because they cared about me, but because they cared about what I'd taken. The calls started first. Repeated, incessant, piling up like trash at my doorstep. Missed calls, one after the other, from numbers I used to memorize without thinking. Their names lit up my screen with the desperation of people losing control. Then came the texts, phrases that were supposed to sound like concern, masking a panic they couldn't quite hide. They weren't reaching out because they missed their daughter. They were reaching out because they had lost what they believed was theirs to own. I didn't respond. I let every message go unanswered. Every call ring out into dead air. Not because I wanted to punish them, but because I wanted them to feel what it was like to reach for someone and find nothing. To be met with silence so dense it echoed. The kind of silence I had lived in for years, under their roof, at their dinner table, inside their family photographs where I was either cropped out or forgotten entirely. It didn't take long for their tone to shift. The words became more urgent. The messages longer, more carefully worded, reaching for something they had never really offered me, emotional leverage. They called it worry, concern, love. But it was all performance. They were afraid. Not for me, but for what they had lost. They didn't miss me. They missed the version of me who served them without resistance. There was no accountability in their panic. No reflection. Just confusion, entitlement, and fear. As if my decision to disappear from their lives was some spontaneous, irrational act. As if they hadn't spent the last 2 decades building the perfect conditions for it. I read every message once, then deleted them. They had never asked how I managed so much with so little support. Never wondered how I kept showing up over and over, even when they ignored me. Never noticed when I stopped sharing parts of my life. Never saw the silence for what it was, the slow erosion of love turned into resignation. Now they were finally feeling it. The weight of being dismissed. The ache of not being chosen. They thought the car and the money were the end of it. That the sting would fade and I would return, grateful just to be acknowledged again. But they didn't understand what they'd actually lost. It wasn't the money. It wasn't the vehicle. It wasn't even my help. It was me. I wasn't the same girl who once waited quietly at the edge of every family event, hoping for a scrap of attention. I wasn't the quiet sister who swallowed every slight and turned the other cheek. That version of me had died the moment I saw my name on the withdrawal slip, the moment I understood that they saw me as a resource, not a person. I moved into my apartment and didn't look back. I painted the walls. I unpacked my books. I drank coffee in the mornings without anyone asking what Jessica wanted instead. I listened to the hum of a city that didn't know my name and didn't need to. I existed completely and freely without apology. And they were left exactly where they had placed me for so long on the outside, watching a life they would never be invited into. There was never going to be a happy ending. Not in the story they wrote for me. I wasn't the favorite. I wasn't the success story. I wasn't even the villain. I was a supporting character in the life they cared about, the one they praised, protected, and poured everything into. I was the scaffolding around Jessica's world, built to hold her up, meant to be taken down once she no longer needed the support. Until I stepped out of their script. They didn't understand what they'd created. They thought I'd stay passive. They thought I'd accept the loss like I always had, quiet, restrained, loyal. They thought I'd let it go. But what they never noticed, never bothered to ask, is how closely I was paying attention. How carefully I had tracked every slight, every moment, every theft dressed up as family obligation. I hadn't just remembered it. I had documented it. So I didn't lash out. I prepared. They didn't know about the legal steps I took until the papers arrived. The formal complaint. The notarized letters. The notice of pending litigation. They didn't realize they had left a trail behind them, bank statements, credit records, trust documents, transaction logs. All of it pointing to one thing, a pattern of exploitation. Not just emotional, financial, repeated, deliberate. I didn't call to warn them. I didn't send an email to explain. I let the law do what it's meant to do when people like them overstep. And when the first letter from my lawyer landed in their mailbox, everything changed. Suddenly, they weren't worried about where I was. They were worried about what I was going to do. They tried to contact me again. I ignored every attempt. They hired their own attorney. They tried to bargain, to paint the theft as a misunderstanding, a family disagreement gone too far. But the paper trail was too clear. The evidence didn't care about intentions. It showed signatures, withdrawals, timelines. It showed the truth. We went to court. They sat across from me for the first time in over a year. Jessica looked thinner, less polished. My mother clutched a tissue she didn't use. My father avoided eye contact until the hearing began. But none of that mattered anymore. Not the expressions. Not the posture. Not the fake sympathy. What mattered was the judgment. The ruling was swift. They were ordered to repay everything down to the last cent. The car, the trust, the unauthorized accounts, the damages, the costs, the humiliation. They'd told themselves for years that family didn't need boundaries. That what was mine was theirs. Now, the law told them otherwise. They sold the house. The one I grew up in. The one where I sat through birthday dinners where I wasn't the one blowing out the candles. The one where my art was never hung on the fridge. The one that smelled like cinnamon on holidays, but never like home. I didn't drive by it when it sold. I didn't want to see it empty. I had already left it behind long ago, first emotionally, then physically. Now it was gone in every sense. And they were left to figure out who they were without the comfort of taking from me. I didn't feel victorious. I felt finished. It wasn't revenge. Revenge would have meant I still cared. This was resolution. Closure made out of paperwork and consequences. It didn't heal the wounds, but it stopped the bleeding. Now, my life is my own. The locks on my apartment are changed. My accounts are secure. My phone no longer lights up with names that used to control my heartbeat. I still carry the scars, but they don't burn anymore. They just remind me where I've been. Sometimes, people ask if I miss them. I don't. Sometimes, people ask if I'll ever forgive them. That's not something they get to ask. And sometimes, I ask myself the quiet question that used to live at the back of my mind for years. What if they had loved me the way I needed them to? But I never stay with that thought too long. Because the life I've built now doesn't leave room for make-believe. They called what I did a betrayal. I call it survival. And in the end, they didn't lose their daughter. They just finally realized. She was never theirs to begin with.